Hey guys, my name is Pete Riley, and I'm one of the co-founders of Answer Rocket, and just excited to be here with all of you to talk about, and really just to give this presentation to you on the future of decision making and how really leading companies are empowering the post-COVID workforce with automated analytics. So, we all know this. We are in uncharted territory. The world is a very different place than it was just a year ago. And we've seen really what looks like 10 years of change in a single year. I mean, I saw some stats that said, I think in Q2 of last year, e-commerce growth was like 40x what it was normally. And it wasn't just e-commerce and how we buy things that changed. As we all well know, everything changed really. What is our home life like? What is our work life like? How do we buy things? How do we stay well and how do we stay entertained? And a lot of these are things that are, as everyone is probably feeling at this point, some will probably go back to some level of normalcy and some will probably be fairly permanent changes for us. But the suddenness of that change has really driven, this need for speed, as we've called it. And this is from a McKinsey study on sort of how COVID-19 has really changed what we're focused on in the enterprise. And 7 out of the 10 boards of directors have said, listen, this has massively accelerated our digital business initiatives post-COVID. So this was also from that same McKinsey study. And what they did was they looked at, pre-COVID and post-COVID, various initiatives that companies had in place and their plans, their expected plans for how long this were going to take them. So the first was around remote work and collaboration. And the general average expectation was that was going to be about 454 days. And in terms of increasing customer demand for online purchasing and services, 525 days. And in terms of using advanced technologies in business decision-making, they expected it would take almost 2 years, 635 days. The truth ended up being quite a bit different. In fact, COVID really forced our hands as businesses. And the first project, instead of 454 days, we ended up doing it in 10, right? Everybody was doing the same thing in March of last year, is moving to basically making it possible to do work remotely. In terms of increasing the second project, increasing customer demand for online purchasing and services, 22 days, basically, instead of 525. And in terms of advanced technologies and business decision-making, 25 days. So literally like a 20x change in terms of what we thought it was going to take and what it actually ended up taking us. Because we simply had to. And so also from that study, I thought this was interesting. In 2017, obviously pre-COVID, the question was asked, so how do you see technology? Is it a source of cost savings, more is a competitive advantage? And really in 2017, huge number of the respondents said it was largely a source of savings in terms of how they were using technology. And that's changed dramatically post-COVID now. It's around, only 10% are now saying this is around cost savings. It's really shifted dramatically to driving competitive advantage. You can see 38%, they're literally saying this is about we're investing more in technology to make it a competitive advantage, or we're modernizing our core technology capabilities to keep up with competition and refocusing the entire business around digital technology. So really, really big shift, just really, again, propelled by the pandemic. They also talked about, so what are the keys to some of the keys to the future? And they outlined 9 different keys. Here are 3 of the big ones that we thought were sort of pulled forward. And one was around radically flattening the organization structures, treating talent as a scarce resource, and turbocharging decision making. That's really going to be the leaping off point for really this whole the rest of the conversation. So I've been working with global 2,000 companies now for about 7 years around how they analyze their business, how they get information, make decisions. And what you find is sort of surprising, really. When you ask folks, how do they analyze their business? How do they answer a question like this? What's driving sales growth? And you would expect, I look at a dashboard and I sort of see it and I make a decision. And that's not really how it works. But what really happens is, so they've got this question about what's maybe driving sales growth, and then they'll typically hunt down data across different sources. Maybe it's third-party data, first-party data, my CRM, and so on. They'll bring that together and sort of merge that data, maybe do some cleansing and some preparation. They'll they'll do some analysis. They might look for growth in different opportunities or the lack of growth or in other opportunities, positive and negative growth. They might build some graphs or charts to help them sort of understand it, maybe even help them start to tell the story, figure out what those results are telling them and interpret those and sort of say, okay, these are the things I think we need to be doing and here's what's happening. And then identifying those key insights and putting a narrative together to help their management understand what they're seeing and recommend some of the decisions they should be making. All of this could take days or weeks. And this is pretty much how it works everywhere. You would think, oh, there's some big data warehouse somewhere and all the answers are in there. And that's just not how it works. It's still very, very manual today and very slow. And obviously it's full of bias. People miss things and so on. And the other challenges are that sort of making this worse, frankly, is data is growing at an astronomical rate. There are not enough analysts to go around, data scientists to go around. And there's this demand for speed to insights is now starting to drive sort of rogue decisions around the enterprise. You'll see different pockets of places using different tools in the organization. And the rise of AI machine learning has just got everybody thinking about, okay, how do I leverage these things for a competitive advantage? So this is a quote from another report from Cognizant's big consulting company called The Work Ahead, Digital First to Last. And they say, the future of work in the organization is going to be shaped by two inevitable and powerful forces. Number one, the growing adoption of intelligent machines. And number two, this future partnership between humans and machines. And we agree, and we see it the same way. So when we talk, I think Gartner coined this term of augmented analytics and this idea that the AI and humans will be sort of working more increasingly in concert, especially as it relates to analytics and understanding what's happening in my business and what I should be doing. And so when you look at that, sort of that process that I outlined for you earlier, what you see is that the human is spending an enormous amount of time in this analysis phase where they're identifying the problem, they're getting the data together, they're analyzing their options and forming conclusions. They spend very little time, frankly, on what humans are good at, ideation and execution. How do we now act on this and how do we make sure that that's successful and so on? It's the things that humans, frankly, are better at doing and enjoy doing and sort of going through this analysis process that the machines are really good at. So what augmented analytics enables you to do, and there's a number of companies in this space, including us, of course, and it takes that analysis and the execution and it sort of flips it. It flips the 80-20. So that now I'm spending only 20% of my time on the analysis component, and I get to spend 80% of my time on the things that humans are uniquely qualified for, this more creative aspect of, okay, so what do we do? What programs do we put in place? What marketing campaigns do we run? And you'll notice, and on top of that, the fact that it's much, much shorter. And in fact, the scale here doesn't really do it justice because very often we're seeing massive changes in how long that takes, anywhere from 10x to even 1,000x improvement on the time it takes to actually perform that analysis step. It's really driving a lot more time around how do I activate those strategies, how do I find growth, how do I more effectively compete. And so augmented analytics, again, there are a number of providers out there. This is just a nice picture of generally what they do. They'll basically combine the data that's accessible to you from various sources and provide a conversational interface to different users of different skill sets and capabilities, all the way from answering simple questions like what was my sales growth last year to much more sophisticated questions powered by more AI and machine learning capabilities around just explain what's happening to my market share or how is my brand doing, and creating stories that involve a combination of charts and naturally generated text to tell you what's going on. Really, a couple of key capabilities of these platforms are that remove a lot of technical barriers. So number one, the ability to ask a natural language query and get them an answer that's frankly powered by AI or machine learning that's very hard to do, impossible off of traditional dashboards today. Natural language insights, which are produced by the machine to help people understand, well, what is that chart telling me, or what outliers is it seeing, or what patterns is it seeing? And obviously being able to do all of this on mobile and voice is really critical. And so it takes that convoluted, manual process that's pervasive throughout the world in our enterprises today. It allows you to ask this question, such as, how did my business do last quarter, and take away all the heavy lifting, gather the data, do the analysis, apply the appropriate AR machine learning algorithm or algorithms, and produce a set of answers in the form of a presentation that you would normally see from a business analyst that you'd be very comfortable reading through and understanding and telling the story about what's happening in your business. And again, orders of magnitude faster than a human can do today. So you'll need, as you go down this path in this journey for yourselves and for your own companies, you'll want to be looking for these routine analysis, things that are done fairly regularly. You'll hear they typically have names like weekly store analysis or monthly supplier analysis or the financial deep dive. But automating these routine analysis and at zero latency, basically it taking no time at all, is really going to activate the human's ability to go figure out, okay, now what do we need to do to go take advantage of that information and go drive growth? These technologies also don't rely on you necessarily having to ask the question. So why not have the system sort of ask the question of itself, right? And produce meaningful insights directed to the people that can act on them and that care about them, that'll help them more proactively drive the business. Sounds great, right? However, Gartner is still saying that, through 2022, only 20% of analytics insights will deliver business outcomes. So some lessons that we've learned, we've been doing this for 7 years now, about how to do this effectively and help you sort of avoid just that only 20%. Here's how you avoid the 80% and to be in that 20% where you are delivering to business outcomes. And so what happens is you'll normally talk to people and they'll say, well, we're building a data lake or we're building this big data warehouse and so on. And traditionally, that's been a pretty normal approach, just to start with this, all right, what's all the data we need? And then put a tool on top of it to provide that output to business users, be it dashboards, traditional dashboards like a Power BI or something like that, which is fine if you're sort of starting with not much, right? If that's really, you're enabling dashboards for the first time, this is a fine approach. But what we're finding is, as you want to move forward into a machine learning and an AI approach, you really need to hone your focus on the business outcomes you're trying to deliver. And so this is increasingly important, and this will help you really achieve success with these technologies. And start with, are we trying to reduce churn? Are we trying to grow the brand? Are we trying to, innovate and so on? And understand our innovation relative to competition. And what are the insights that we need to sort of drive that business outcome? And what is the process that you would need to go through to take that data and turn it into insights? And then finally, what is the data required? Because what ends up happening is if you go the other way, very often, I can't tell you how many times I've seen these, I think I call them the data lake to nowhere, where you end up with this data lake, but then the business still ends up simply extracting the data to go through that manual process, because not everything they need is in this environment to support that business outcome and that analysis. But if you start with that business outcome and go this way, you're insured to have the data required to support that entire process and avoid that convoluted manual process that we talked about earlier. So as you look at your organization, you start to prioritize opportunities for automation around analytics. Come up with that list of business outcomes and related questions, and then look at, what's your ability to activate that? Do I have all the data? Do we know the analysis that we need to do on it? And then what's the potential impact on the business? Because you want to wind up obviously in that place where, it's going to have a high potential to impact the business. And two, we have a high ability to activate that as an organization. Those are going to be the projects obviously that will really sort of move the needle. So a few examples of folks that we've been working with to basically help them leverage augmented analytics to advance their business outcomes. One is a $27 billion snacks company. They were really interested in just understanding more about these post-COVID stimulus packages. What was that going to do to demand? And not just as overall as a company, but in particular retailers or in particular geographies or particular products. And that more accurate demand forecasting is positioning them well to understand where do they need to invest and sort of spend their time with various retailers and geographies and products and so on to maximize growth. Another is a $20 billion consumer staples company. And their challenge is they just have armies of folks that are spending enormous time trying to figure out what are the growth, what is contributing to growth, what's hurting growth, and where are pockets of opportunity. And so our ability to automate that has really helped them focus much more on executing their growth strategies than spending their time climbing through data. And then finally, a $9 billion consumer beauty company. They have a huge number of SKUs. Obviously, this industry has really been hurt by COVID. So it's been increasingly important for them to understand, what are our star products that we need to invest in? And what are the products that are maybe just lagging behind that we should maybe cut our losses on and move on and really optimize our product portfolio? So just to wrap it all up, look, we all know this. The world has drastically changed. I can't remember, anything in my lifetime where everybody in the world was sort of experiencing the same thing at the same time. So massive change. In response, we've had to go much faster than we thought we would around our digital transformation by 20 plus X. And that speed of decision making is increasingly a key competitive advantage, especially when so much is changing. And our ability to react to that and take advantage of opportunities and sort of cut our losses in places where those are not winners for us is just really even more critical today. And augmented analytics can really help the human decision making process, but to really maximize your chances of success, I would encourage you start with that business outcome. Don't just start with a data lake. You don't want to end up with sort of the data lake to nowhere. It does require this reorientation around really being very specific around those business outcomes you're trying to drive and applying the technology to achieve that business outcome. So that's all I have today. There's my email. If anybody wants to reach out, feel free. And I believe there's a Q&A session later, and I hope to see some of you there. Thanks.
Big thanks to Pete there for his presentation, and we're now going to be joined by Pete for the Q&A session. I can see Pete just about to come through there, so hopefully we'll kick that off soon. If you do have questions, as I've mentioned a few times, and do apologise for the repetitive nature of my hosting today, but people obviously coming in and out of the platform throughout the day. So just want to reiterate, if you do have questions, pop them in the chat, and we can get those to the speaker. Welcome, Pete. I can see you. I'm going to start with the classic question of can you hear me okay and see me okay?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thanks for your presentation, Pete. Great overview. I think we might have lost you there. I think you're reconnecting. Just bear with us while we get Pete through here. Should be a few minutes. Pete, we did have you, but I think you dropped for a while, so we'll just give it a few seconds and wait for you to come back through. Pete, I'm not sure if you're having an issue there, but I can see you're through there, but can't actually see or hear you. Best way to troubleshoot maybe is to exit and follow the link back in, and then hopefully we can get the Q&A session underway. Just to while we do wait for Pete to do that, just a few more announcements, and for those that have joined us since my welcome notes this morning, just a bit of brief background. We've got several presentations and interviews coming up throughout the day. If you're on the Beyond Business Buzzwords page, you will be able to see the agenda. The agenda is unchanged, so that's the most accurate way of determining what's next. And times, the times are all in Eastern Standard Time, so wherever you are watching in the world, just plug that one into Google and you'll get the time. That's New York time zone. Pete, I can see you're there now. Can you hear me?
Hey, sorry about that. I was trying to change my camera. That didn't go so well, so I apologize.
No worries. Well, good to have you with us, and thanks so much for the presentation. It was really great to hear from you and to hear from your narrative, and we've got a few questions here that we perhaps can get going with.
Fantastic.
Good stuff. So I think a lot of people will be asking the question of, getting started with AI-based analytics. So how would you kind of recommend an organization or someone heading up that part of the organization to get started and get their head around kind of AI-based analytics?
Yeah. And I alluded to this to some degree in the presentation, but I would say don't approach it sort of in the traditional, I got a big data lake, and I, in the traditional manner of sort of maybe putting a dashboard on top of data. It requires much more focus on that business outcome, as I mentioned. And so my advice would be start with as simple a question as you possibly can. Hey, what's the impact that I think I mentioned? What's the impact of the COVID stimulus package is going to be on my, on the organization and so on. The more focus you can bring to that, the easier it is, I think, going to be get a handle on the process required, the data required, and solve that problem. And I'm talking about in weeks being able to start solving this problem, as opposed to the months that it could take if you're trying to stand up a huge data warehouse and so on. So I would definitely start with small, focused, important sets of questions that really have a big impact on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And the more focused you can be, I can't tell you. I mean, literally, orders of magnitude impact on your ability to deliver something quickly, and in many cases, the impact of that project. Yeah.
Nice, good answer. And then the biggest hurdles and challenges to an organization that wants to go down the road of adoption and bring it in.
These are all sort of going to sound pretty related, because they are. I think, first of all, there's a mindset and a paradigm that exists around just dashboards. And so people sort of tend to sort of lean back on those things that are sort of comfortable to them, and sort of moving away from this broad tool. Not that the tools can't do that, by the way, but it's something to sort of build towards, as opposed to sort of start from. So really is important to start on those very focused questions and not confuse. I think one of the things I've seen happen is then people get confused if you try to do too much at once. They get confused about, well, when should I go to a traditional dashboard versus when would I go to a different, use a different tool like this, and getting people used to the idea that it solves a different set of problems. It solves not an information problem or a what problem, right? It starts to answer a why problem, right? Or a why question, or what do I do next sort of question. And it's sort of a little bit of a different mindset, getting people used to the idea that here's sort of the path that I go on for these kinds of things. Here's how I leverage that technology. Here's how it fits into my workflow. Like we see that a lot, where people try too hard to replace, entire workflows and entire analysis processes all at once, when sometimes it's just easier for the user to just get a handle on a piece or two that might save them a week here or a week there, and sort of build towards, automating a full analysis process for a category or brand or something like that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good answer. And just quickly with that, as people kind of do take on that change, it's an organizational thing. How do people kind of collectively get on board with taking it into the organization and understanding it and making it part of their everyday approach to work? Sure.
Well, it's a lot like other sort of change initiatives in a company. If you just sort of put something out there, but people don't understand what it is, why would I start using this? What's in it for me? Sort of thing. It is still important. Those truths around how to manage change, especially in a big organization, they don't go away. In fact, I'd say they're even more important now, because people are very close to these processes. They're close to their spreadsheets. They're close to their data, and there is a process for sort of bringing people into that, helping them understand, the data is there. You can sort of trust it. The process is transparent. So, because people's jobs are, they're relying on, this correct information and presenting the information properly. And so you really got to work closely with them so they understand how these things are being built, and so that they can start to really trust it, to then sort of let go. It's like the self-driving thing. If you're in a Tesla, the first time you sort of let go of the wheel, it's a little weird, right? And so there's a little bit of that, right? And sort of bringing people along and getting them comfortable with that is absolutely critical.
Yeah, nice answer. And then what's the key difference between traditional business intelligence like dashboards and augmented analytics?
Yeah, I would say, the traditional dashboards are great. They're very good at answering sort of some basic what questions, what were sales, or what was sales growth, or something like that. And what you're increasingly able to do with these solutions is really answer the why questions, and even answer the, what's next, where are we headed, sorts of questions. And they're potentially much more impactful to the business. And frankly, they're automating a lot of the things that people actually do with dashboards. I think I mentioned in the presentation, when you ask people what they do with dashboards, very often they're like, oh, the first thing I do is I download a bunch of data and I put it into my spreadsheets and I go through my process. And so there's tremendous power in automating that process from top to bottom, as opposed to, just providing people a snapshot of sort of what happened. Start to really tell them, here's what, not only what happened, but here's why it happened, and maybe here's what to do next. And that's really the power of these technologies.
Nice. And then over the course of the pandemic, have you kind of seen your customers' needs changing and evolving differently to kind of what you'd expect to see?
I don't know about different, I don't know what to expect in a pandemic. I don't know
Of
about,
course, yeah.
but it was really interesting. We do a lot in the consumer goods space. And so it really just became more and more critical for our customers to understand what was happening, because the amount of change that was happening was just enormous, right? And is this just pantry stocking, or is this a more permanent thing for us, and really depended on the business? Some were doing really well, like especially the food companies were doing great. The cosmetics companies were really struggling. But because you had sort of this great, divergence, I guess, it actually increased a lot of activity for us, because of the amount of change. Everybody had questions. Either how do I capitalize on growth, or how do I recover? So really a lot more interest and focus on data and analytics. And because there's so much more data and so much more change, increasingly people are looking for these kinds of technologies to just help them get the answers about why things are happening and what they should be doing next.
Nice. And finally, to wrap up, what would you say to kind of anyone toying with the idea of bringing something like this on board?
Yeah, I think it would be a lot of the things that I sort of echoed in the presentation, which is don't try to come at it with the old mindset. Come at it with a very focused, highly important problem. And what we've seen is we'll start with literally one of those questions, say, the impact on COVID stimulus on my company. That quickly gets traction, and then you'll start to see the business start to pull it, right? As opposed to you trying to push this big thing, on the business, which I've seen people do. Starting with something small that has a high impact, and you'll be made. We went in this one project. I think we went from one project in November to, I think we're up to 5 or 6 right now, because the business is seeing this and the business is pulling, as opposed to the technology folks pushing.
Nice. Well, Pete, that's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for joining us and for answering those questions. A great presentation, and it's been a pleasure to understand a bit more about AnswerRocket and hear from you.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot.
All right. Cheers, Pete. Take care now, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.